He held the single, crinkled piece of paper as if it were a royal decree, its edges softened by the hands of a child. It was a drawing, rendered in crayon, of a small boy with a wide smile standing beside a tall man in a white thobe, a crudely drawn red and white headdress on his head. Above them, a brilliant yellow sun beamed down. This simple drawing was taped to the front of $100 million acquisition contract, a splash of innocent color against the stark, black and white world of corporate conquest. The man, Khalid Al-Fahim, a titan whose name was a whisper of awe and fear in boardrooms across the globe, stared at it, his heart aching with an emotion he had long forgotten. How did a billionaire who had built impenetrable walls around his soul end up with his world completely undone by a single mother he was never even supposed to meet? If you believe that one chance encounter can change a destiny, that kindness is a currency more valuable than gold, then like this video and subscribe to our channel. The story of how this drawing became more precious to him than his entire empire is one you will never forget. Khalid's penthouse was a monument to solitude, a glass palace suspended 80 floors above the sprawling metropolis. It was a world of polished marble, cold steel, and silent, automated efficiency. The panoramic windows displayed the city like a diamond tapestry woven just for him, yet he felt no connection to the millions of lives flickering below. His wealth had bought him everything but warmth, every luxury but genuine connection. Each morning, he would stand before the glass, clad in a pristine white thobe, the red and white gutra on his head, a symbol of a heritage he honored with duty but not with joy. His heart was a fortress, built brick by painful brick after a devastating betrayal years ago had taught him that love was a liability and trust was a fool's game. The silence of his home was absolute, broken only by the whisper of the climate control system. It was the sound of a gilded tomb, and he was its lonely pharaoh, surrounded by treasures that could not fill the echoing void within him. He was the master of a universe of numbers and assets, a king on a throne of ice, and he had convinced himself this was all he needed. Power was his shield, wealth his armor. But a shield can become a cage, and armor can become a prison. He was safe, but he was not alive. He was existing, not living, and deep down, a part of him he had tried to silence for years was beginning to scream. Far below, in a part of the city the penthouse windows looked past but never truly saw, Clara was fighting a different kind of silence. It was the silence of an empty pantry, the silence of unpaid bills piling up on a rickety kitchen table, the silence of a future that seemed to hold no promise. Her small apartment was a world of chipped paint, threadbare carpets, and a persistent, damp chill that no blanket could fully ward off. Yet, within these humble walls, there was a warmth Khalid's billions could never replicate. It radiated from her 5-year-old son, Sam, a small boy with eyes as bright as a summer sky and a spirit that refused to be dimmed by their poverty. He was her sun, her moon, and all her stars. But Sam was sick. He had a recurring respiratory illness that clung to him like the winter cold, and the doctors spoke of treatments and surgeries with price tags that sounded like cruel jokes. Every cough from his small room was a dagger in Clara's heart, a reminder of her powerlessness. Today, she was getting ready for an interview, not for a corner office but for a janitorial position at Al-Fahim Industries. The thought of working in the gleaming tower that dominated the skyline felt like stepping into another dimension. She pulled on her best clothes, a simple pair of blue jeans, a beige shirt that had been mended twice, and a thin beige coat that was no match for the city's biting wind. She looked at her reflection in the cracked bathroom mirror, a 25-year-old woman with the weight of the world in her eyes, and tried to practice a smile. "You can do this," she whispered, her breath fogging the glass. For him, she kissed Sam's forehead as he slept, his small hand clutching a well-loved, one-eyed teddy bear. For him, she would walk into the lion's den. For him, she would scrub floors on her hands and knees. For him, she would do anything. She didn't know that destiny, in its strange and mysterious way, wasn't sending her to the lion's den, but to the lion himself. The lobby of the Al-Fahim Tower was an exercise in intimidation. It was a cavern of gleaming granite and soaring steel, so vast and silent that Clara's worn-out boots squeaked with embarrassing clarity against the polished floor. A monolithic fountain, sculpted from black marble, gurgled softly in the center, its sound only amplifying the cathedral-like quiet. People in sharp, expensive suits moved with a silent, predatory grace, their eyes flicking over her simple attire with dismissive coolness. Clara felt like a sparrow that had accidentally flown into a hawk's nest. She clutched her resume, the paper now slightly damp from her nervous hands, and approached the main reception desk, a slab of onyx that looked more like an altar to commerce than a piece of furniture. A stern-faced woman barely glanced at her. "Name?" the woman asked, her voice clipped and devoid of warmth. "Clara Jensen. I have an interview with Human Resources." For the custodial position, the receptionist typed for a moment, her brow furrowed in annoyance. At that exact moment, a panicked-looking young assistant rushed to the desk, holding two identical-looking folders. "I need the file for the C. Jensen interview, top floor, right now. Mr. Al-Fahim is waiting," he hissed, his eyes wide with fear. In his haste, he pointed at Clara. "Is this C. Jensen?" The receptionist, eager to offload the responsibility, simply nodded. "Yes, top floor," she said to Clara, gesturing towards a private, gold-plated elevator she hadn't even noticed. The assistant grabbed Clara's arm gently but firmly. "Come with me, please. We are incredibly late." Clara was too stunned to argue, too intimidated to question the sudden change of plans. She thought perhaps this was just how they did things here, a strange, high-stakes process even for the cleaning staff. The elevator ascended with dizzying, silent speed, the city falling away beneath them. When the golden doors slid open, they revealed not a bustling office, but a vast, minimalist space that looked more like an art gallery. And there, standing before a window that spanned the entire wall, was a man in a flowing white thobe and a red and white keffiyeh. He turned, and his eyes, dark and piercing, met hers. It was Khalid Al-Fahim. He was expecting Catherine Jensen, a ruthless corporate raider from a rival firm. He saw a young woman in a threadbare coat, her face pale with a mixture of awe and terror, clutching a resume for a janitor. Khalid's mind, a machine calibrated for billion-dollar decisions and ruthless efficiency, momentarily stalled. He stared at the woman standing before him, a fragile apparition in his sterile sanctuary. His gaze swept over her. The cheap coat, the worn jeans, the wide, terrified eyes that held an astonishing depth of sincerity. His ever-loyal executive assistant, Faisal, stood discreetly by the door, his face a mask of controlled panic as he realized the catastrophic mix-up. Khalid's first instinct was cold, sharp annoyance. This was an infuriating waste of his time. He was about to summon security with a flick of his wrist, to have this nobody, removed from his presence. But then he saw how she clutched her simple, one-page resume to her chest, as if it were a shield. He saw the faint tremor in her hands. There was no guile in her posture, no artifice. There was only a raw, unvarnished vulnerability that was so alien in his world of calculated masks and predatory smiles that it disarmed him. A flicker of cruel curiosity ignited within the ice. He would play this out. He gestured to the plush leather chair opposite his colossal obsidian desk. "Sit," he commanded, his voice a low baritone that was accustomed to absolute obedience. Clara, still reeling from the sheer shock, moved as if in a dream and sat on the very edge of the seat, looking as though she might bolt at any second. Khalid seated himself, the picture of regal authority. He did not look at her resume. He leaned forward, his dark eyes locking onto hers. "My company is at a crossroads," he began, his voice smooth and dangerous, deciding to use the opening he had prepared for the corporate predator he was supposed to be interviewing. "We are looking to acquire a portfolio of distressed assets in the manufacturing sector. The challenge is to liquidate the non-performing elements while absorbing the core infrastructure with minimal brand damage. What would be your strategy for a hostile takeover of a beloved, family-run competitor?" The question hung in the air, a complex and brutal piece of corporate warfare. Clara just stared at him, her mind completely blank. The worlds of hostile takeovers and brand damage were as foreign to her as the surface of the moon. Clara's heart hammered against her ribs. The billionaire's words were a foreign language, a collection of cold, sharp sounds that meant nothing to her. Distressed assets? Hostile takeover? She had come here hoping to talk about cleaning supplies and floor buffers. A wave of dizziness washed over her. She knew, with sickening certainty, that there had been a terrible mistake. She could lie, try to stammer out some nonsense she'd overheard on the news, but the lie would die on her lips. Looking into Khalid al-Fahim's intense, unblinking eyes, she felt that anything other than the truth would be a profound violation. She took a shaky breath, her gaze dropping to her own worn hands, clasped tightly in her lap. "Sir," she began, her voice barely a whisper, yet it cut through the oppressive silence of the office. "I think there has been a mistake. I'm not who you think I am." She finally lifted her eyes to meet his. "I don't know anything about taking over a company. The only thing I know about family run is trying to run my own family. It's just me and my little boy." A single hot tear of humiliation welled in her eye, and she angrily blinked it back. "My strategy isn't about assets. It's about getting through the day. It's about making sure my son has food to eat and medicine when his fever spikes. I came here to apply for a job cleaning your floors, because I've learned that when things are falling apart, the only thing you can do is start cleaning up the mess, piece by piece." With your own two hands, her speech ended in a rush of air, leaving her breathless and exposed. She expected him to laugh, to call security, to dismiss her with a cruel wave. The silence stretched, thick and heavy. Khalid did not move. He simply watched her, his expression unreadable. Her raw, desperate honesty was like a stone thrown into the still, frozen lake of his soul. It shattered the surface. For the first time in a decade, he was hearing a voice that wasn't trying to flatter him, manipulate him, or take something from him. It was just the truth, plain and painful and beautiful. A strange, unfamiliar feeling stirred within Khalid. It was not pity. It was a profound, unsettling sense of recognition. In her desperate confession, he heard an echo of a time long past, a time before the billions and the betrayals, when his own family had faced ruin. He remembered the quiet dignity of his father trying to hold their world together. Clara's words about cleaning up the mess resonated in the deepest chambers of his heart. He had spent his entire adult life acquiring things, but what had he truly built? What mess had he cleaned? He made a decision, one that defied all logic and protocol. It was an impulse, a deviation from the meticulously planned blueprint of his life. He looked over at Faisal, who was still frozen with anxiety near the door. "Faisal," Khalid said, his voice calm but firm. "Cancel my remaining appointments for the day." Faisal's eyes widened, but he simply bowed his head. "Yes, Mr. Al-Fahim." Khalid turned his attention back to Clara, who looked utterly bewildered. "You are correct, Ms. Jensen. You are not the candidate I was expecting for the Vice President of Acquisitions." A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched his lips. "However, your answer was more insightful than you know." He rose from his chair and walked towards the vast window, looking down at the city. "This organization has a philanthropic arm, the Al-Fahim Foundation. It is a disorganized, neglected part of my enterprise. A mess," he said, turning back to her. "I need someone to organize its archives, to go through records of past donations, of families we have helped and causes we have supported. It requires diligence, honesty, and a respect for the stories of people's lives. It does not pay what a vice president makes, but it pays a living wage. The position is yours, if you want it." Clara stared at him, speechless. From janitor to archivist, just like that. Felt like a dream, a fairy tale. "Why?" she managed to ask, her voice trembling. Khalid's gaze was direct, his dark eyes searching hers. "Because you did not lie to me," he said simply. "In this building, that makes you the most qualified person I have met in a very long time." Meanwhile, in a lavish office on a lower floor, Khalid's cousin, Rashid, received a report of the day's strange events. A janitorial candidate being personally hired by the CEO for a position in the foundation? Rashid's lips twisted into a sneer. He saw every person, every event, as a piece on a chessboard. And this new, unexpected piece, he was certain he could use it to his advantage. Clara's new life began the following Monday. The Foundation's archives were located in a quiet, forgotten corner of the colossal building, a stark contrast to the high-energy trading floors and executive suites. It was a large, dust-filled room lined with shelves groaning under the weight of countless forgotten files. For anyone else, it might have seemed a punishment, a form of corporate exile. For Clara, it was a sanctuary. The quiet hum of the ventilation was a peaceful lullaby compared to the frantic noise of her worries. Here, she was not just cleaning messes. She was curating stories of hope. Each file contained a life, a struggle, a moment where the Al-Fahim Empire had touched the real world. She worked with a focused dedication that was born of pure gratitude. She organized the chaotic records, creating a digital database, her fingers flying across the keyboard. She was meticulous, careful, and efficient. The job gave her more than just a steady income that could finally cover Sam's medication. It gave her a sense of purpose. Khalid found himself inventing reasons to visit the archives. He told Faisal he needed to review past charitable expenditures, a task he had never once shown interest in before. He would stand in the doorway, watching Clara as she worked, her brow furrowed in concentration, a stray strand of hair falling across her face. She moved with a quiet grace, her presence a pool of calm in his turbulent world. He was fascinated by her. She asked for nothing, expected nothing, and yet gave everything to the simple task before her. One evening, as she was packing up to leave, he approached her. "Ms. Jensen," he said, his voice softer than he intended. She jumped, startled. "Oh, Mr. Al-Fahim. I didn't see you there," he gestured to the newly organized shelves. "You have done remarkable work here. You have brought order to chaos," she smiled. A genuine, radiant smile that lit up her tired face. "It feels good to make things right," she said. "My son Sam, he loves stories, and every one of these files is a story. I just try to put them in the right order so they can be remembered properly." The mention of her son sparked an idea in Khalid's mind, a plan that was both strategic and deeply personal. He wanted to understand the source of her strength, the wellspring of her unwavering goodness. He wanted to meet the boy who inspired it all. The opportunity came a week later. Khalid arranged for a mandatory company-wide family fun day at the city's largest park, an event that baffled his senior executives but was part of his carefully constructed plan. He knew Clara would bring Sam. He saw them near the duck pond, Clara pointing out the birds to a small, bundled-up boy with her same earnest eyes. Khalid approached them, having shed his formal thobe for a simple, tailored black suit, though he still felt out of place. Faisal stood at a respectful distance, observing his employer with a knowing, subtle smile. "Ms. Jensen." "Clara," Khalid said, his greeting feeling awkward on his tongue. "And this must be Sam." Sam, clutching his one-eyed teddy bear, looked up at the tall, imposing man with wide, curious eyes. He wasn't intimidated. He simply pointed at Khalid's head. "Are you a king?" he asked, his small voice clear as a bell. Khalid was taken aback. "A king? Why would you say that?" Sam pointed again. "Because of your special hat. It looks like a crown." He was referring to the keffiyeh Khalid had chosen to wear, a familiar comfort even with his Western suit. Clara's face flushed with embarrassment. "Sam, that's not. You shouldn't," but Khalid laughed. It was a real, unforced sound that surprised even himself. He knelt down so he was at eye level with the small boy. "Sometimes it feels like being a king," he admitted, his voice gentle. "But it can be very lonely." Sam considered this with the profound seriousness of a child. "My teddy bear gets lonely," he said, holding up the worn toy. "But I give him hugs so he feels better." Without another thought, Sam stepped forward and wrapped his small arms around Khalid's neck in a clumsy, heartfelt hug. For a moment Khalid froze. The simple, unconditional act of affection was a shock to his system. He could feel the small boy's warmth, smell the faint scent of soap and childhood. Slowly, hesitantly, he raised his own arms and hugged the boy back. The fortress around his heart didn't just crack. A whole section of the wall crumbled to dust. Looking over Sam's shoulder, he saw Clara watching them, her eyes shining with unshed tears. In that moment, a fragile, tender connection was forged between the three of them, a silent promise of something new and beautiful. But from the shadows of a nearby tree, Rashid watched the scene unfold, his face contorted in a mask of pure, venomous jealousy. He saw not a heartwarming moment, but a dangerous alliance, a weakness in the king's armor that he was now determined to exploit. The fragile peace was shattered 2 weeks later. Sam suffered a severe asthmatic attack, far worse than any he had ever had before. The panicked rush to the emergency room, the terrifying sound of his wheezing breaths, the sterile white walls of the hospital. It was Clara's worst nightmare brought to life. The doctors stabilized him, but their prognosis was grim. Sam needed a specialized surgery, a procedure that would clear his airways permanently, but it came with a staggering cost, a figure so astronomical it might as well have been $1 billion. Clara sat by his bedside, holding his small, sleeping hand, her world collapsing around her. The hope that had bloomed in her heart since starting her new job withered into despair. She thought of Khalid, of his kindness, of the way he had looked at her son. A part of her wanted to run to him to beg for his help, but her pride, a fierce and stubborn thing, held her back. She would not be a charity case. She would not be the damsel in distress waiting for a prince to save her. She would find a way on her own, even if it seemed impossible. Rashid, however, had no such scruples. His network of informants within the company was vast, and he learned of Sam's hospitalization almost immediately. He saw his golden opportunity. With calculated cruelty, he began to spin his web. He compiled a dossier, a collection of half-truths and outright fabrications. He painted Clara as a masterful grifter, a single mother who targeted wealthy, lonely men. He included falsified bank records suggesting she had received large sums from other benefactors in the past. He even hired a private investigator to take photos of her outside the hospital, looking distraught, framing her grief as a performance. He waited for the perfect moment, then requested a private meeting with his cousin. He found Khalid in his office, staring out at the rain-streaked city, a pensive look on his face. "Khalid," Rashid began, his voice oozing with false concern. "There is something you need to see. It is about the woman from the archives. I am worried she is not who she appears to be." He slid the sleek, black folder across the obsidian desk. "I had her investigated for your protection. I fear she is using her sick child to play on your sympathies, to trap you." Khalid stared at the folder as if it were a venomous snake. The word trap struck him like a physical blow. It was the exact word used to describe what his former fiancée had done years ago, a woman who had feigned love only to attempt to sell corporate secrets, an act of betrayal that had frozen his heart and taught him to trust no one. All his old wounds, which had just begun to heal under the gentle warmth of Clara's presence, were ripped open again. He reluctantly opened the folder. The fabricated evidence was convincing. The photos of a desperate Clara were twisted to look like the calculated theatrics of a con artist. Rashid's carefully crafted narrative preyed on Khalid's deepest fears, his most painful memories. The poison seeped into his mind, clouding his judgment, resurrecting the cynical, ruthless man he had worked so hard to become. His newfound hope curdled into bitter suspicion. Was this all a game? Was her sincerity a mask? Was Sam's hug just part of the act? The thought was an agony, but it was a familiar agony, a pain he understood. Love was a weapon, and he had foolishly let down his guard. He became cold, distant. He stopped visiting the archives. When he passed Clara in the hallway, his eyes were like chips of ice, his expression a wall of stone. Clara was devastated by the sudden change. The warmth and kindness he had shown her vanished, replaced by a chilling indifference. She didn't understand what she had done wrong. Juggling her work, her mounting medical bills, and her vigil at Sam's bedside, his silent rejection was a cruelty she couldn't bear. She felt utterly alone, her brief fairy tale turning into a cold, harsh reality. But Faisal, the ever-watchful aide, saw it all. He saw the folder Rashid had delivered. He saw the light go out of his employer's eyes, and he saw the genuine, soul-crushing despair on Clara's face. Faisal had served the Al-Fahim family his entire life. He knew Rashid's bitter ambition and his talent for deceit. He did not believe for a second that Clara was a fraud. Trusting his instincts and his loyalty to the man Khalid could be, not the man he was pretending to be, Faisal decided to launch his own quiet investigation. He would uncover the truth no matter the cost. Faisal began his work with the quiet efficiency of a ghost. He used the company's formidable security resources not to spy on Clara, but to investigate Rashid. He pulled security footage, analyzed phone records, and followed the money trail from the private investigator Rashid had hired. It didn't take long for the web of lies to unravel. The bank statements were forgeries, the investigator a known purveyor of corporate slander. But Faisal didn't stop there. He felt a deeper current running beneath this deception. He dug into Rashid's corporate dealings, specifically his management of a small manufacturing subsidiary years ago. That's when he found it. A series of hushed-up safety violation reports, all signed off and buried by Rashid. The name of the brave engineer who had originally filed the reports, who had been fired for his integrity, was David Jensen, Clara's late husband. The pieces clicked into place with horrifying clarity. David Jensen had been blacklisted, unable to find work in his field. The stress and financial ruin had contributed to the heart condition that had taken his life 2 years later. Rashid hadn't just sabotaged Clara in the present. He was the architect of her past tragedy. Faisal knew he had to act immediately. He gathered the evidence, the proof of Rashid's lies about Clara and the damning files on the cover-up that had destroyed her husband, and raced to the penthouse. He found Khalid standing before the window, a solitary, brooding figure. He was in the middle of dictating a severance package for Clara to his secretary. "Stop," Faisal said, his voice ringing with an authority Khalid had never heard from him before. "You are about to make a terrible mistake." He laid the files on the desk, his hand steady. "This is the truth. The woman you are about to destroy is the widow of a man your cousin already ruined." Khalid stared at the documents, his face draining of color. He read about the cover-up, about the honest engineer, about the name David Jensen. He saw the proof of Rashid's lies, the depth of his malevolent deception. The ice around his heart didn't just crack. It vaporized. The betrayal he felt was white-hot, but this time it was not a wound that made him retreat. It was a fire that forged him into something new. Remorse, shame, and a towering rage washed over him. He had allowed his past pain to blind him, to make him a pawn in Rashid's cruel game. He had hurt the one person who had shown him genuine, unvarnished goodness. At that exact moment, the intercom buzzed. It was Rashid. "Khalid, have you dealt with the Jensen woman yet?" he asked, his voice slick with false camaraderie. Khalid pressed the speaker button, his eyes blazing. "Come to my office, Rashid. Now," he commanded, his voice a low, deadly growl. "We have something to discuss." The confrontation was not a shouting match. It was an execution. Khalid laid out the evidence on the desk, his silence more damning than any accusation. Rashid's smug confidence melted into pure terror as he saw his entire world of lies exposed. "You are a disgrace to our family name," Khalid said, his voice lethally quiet. "You prey on the weak. You destroy good people for your own gain. You are no longer part of this company. You are no longer part of my family. Security will escort you from the building. If you ever come near me or them again, I will use the full weight of this empire to crush you with that." He turned his back on his cousin, a man he would never see again. But his work was not done. The most important apology was yet to be made. He grabbed his coat and ran from the office, leaving the ruins of his old life behind. His only thought to get to the hospital, to get to Clara and Sam, and to beg for a forgiveness he knew he did not deserve. Khalid arrived at the hospital like a storm, his presence commanding the attention of the entire floor. But when he reached the door to Sam's room, he stopped. He saw Clara through the small window, asleep in a chair by the bed, her face etched with exhaustion and worry. Her hand was still holding Sam's. His heart twisted with a pain so profound it took his breath away. This was the woman he had accused of being a gold digger, the woman he had abandoned in her darkest hour. He quietly entered the room. The sound of the door closing roused Clara. She looked up, her eyes wide and fearful when she saw him, expecting the final blow, the termination of her employment. Khalid didn't speak. He simply walked to the administrative desk outside and spoke to the head nurse. He handed her his personal card. "Whatever this child needs," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Whatever it costs, it is covered. The best surgeons, the best care. I am taking care of everything." He returned to the room. Clara was on her feet, her expression a mixture of confusion and disbelief. What are you doing?" she stammered. He finally looked at her, his own eyes shining with unshed tears. "I am trying to clean up a mess," he said, his voice breaking as he echoed her own words back to her. "A mess I made. Clara, I am so sorry. I was a fool. I let my own past poison me, and I hurt you. There is no excuse for my behavior." He then told her everything. About Rashid, about the lies, and about the terrible discovery of what had been done to her husband. As she listened, Clara's anger and confusion melted away, replaced by a wave of grief and, astonishingly, understanding. She saw that his fortress had been built from pain, just as her resilience had been. The surgery was scheduled for the next day. Khalid never left the hospital. He sat with Clara in the waiting room, a silent, solid presence as the hours ticked by. He didn't offer empty platitudes. He simply shared her vigil, his presence a quiet promise that she was no longer alone. When the surgeon finally emerged, smiling, to tell them the operation was a complete success, Clara collapsed into Khalid's arms, sobbing with relief. He held her tightly, stroking her hair, feeling the last of his icy walls dissolve into nothing. In the days that followed, as Sam recovered with a speed that amazed the doctors, a new, gentle reality took shape. Khalid was there every day, not as a billionaire benefactor, but as a friend. He read stories to Sam, his deep baritone a comforting rumble. He brought Clara coffee and made sure she ate. He listened. He learned. He fell in love. One afternoon, as they watched Sam sleeping peacefully, his breathing finally easy and clear, Clara turned to him. "You didn't have to do all this," she whispered. Khalid took her hand, his thumb gently stroking her knuckles. "Yes, I did," he replied, his gaze soft and full of a love he never thought he would feel again. "You and Sam. You didn't just save Sam's life. You saved mine." The penthouse was no longer a cold, silent tomb. It was filled with the sound of a child's laughter. Sam's crayon drawings, especially the one of the king and the little boy, were now framed and hung on the walls like priceless masterpieces. Khalid al-Fahim, the titan of industry, had finally acquired his most valuable asset, a family. He, Clara, and Sam would often stand at the vast window, not looking down on the world, but looking out at their future, a future they would build together. If this story touched your heart and made you believe in the power of second chances, please share it with someone who needs a little hope. And don't forget to comment below with your thoughts. What do you think is the greatest wealth a person can have?